Welcome, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started tonight. Um, my name is Corey Hennessy. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs. I am the Director of Education and Programs at the LGBT Center of Raleigh. And I want to do just a few little announcements before we get started into the discussion. So again, thank you for joining us this evening. We are going to start off tonight with something called Courageous Conversations. Tonight, we are focusing on the unique challenges when aging as a transgender adult. Program is the second in a series of Pride Month events put on by AARP North Carolina, the LGBT Center of Raleigh, and Sage Central North Carolina. The third event will be next Friday, June 18th at 2 p.m., again on Zoom. We will be talking to U.S. Representatives David Price and Deborah Ross and City Council members Jonathan Melton and Stormy Fort on local and statewide policy, legislation, and inclusion in North Carolina. Executive Director of Equality North Carolina, Kendra Johnson, will be leading what will be a very interesting and very informative discussion. PAX will be sharing the registration link in the chat box, so please be sure to get signed up early. In addition, Sage will be hosting a virtual talent show on Zoom for Tuesday, June 15th at 7:30, as well as an event that is sponsored by the Alzheimer's Association of North Carolina on Thursday, June 17th at 6 p.m. Please reach out to Les for more information and how to sign up. The LGBT Center of Raleigh will also be holding a car parade and community vendor fair on Sunday, June 27th from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Dix Park. There will be cars decorated in all the colors of the rainbow and so much more happening that day. We will have lots and lots of booths set up that will be offering resources, information, swag, games, fun, smiles, maybe hugs if people are comfortable. But it should be a very exciting and very fun day, especially since we have had to cancel out Raleigh Pride this year. Just some special thanks to our panelists, moderator, Pax Baptist with AARP, and Les Geller with Sage Central North Carolina. And now I would like to do a little introduction for our moderator this evening, Joaquin Carcano. Joaquin calls home both the Rio Grande Valley of the Texas-Mexico border and Durham, North Carolina. He is a queer transgender Mexican-American man and the director of community organizing for the Latino Commission on AIDS. Latinos in the South program, working regionally from North Carolina to Texas. In 2016, he became the lead plaintiff against the state of North Carolina to overturn their anti-LGBTQ HB2 legislation. He is a member of the board of directors of the LGBTQ Center of Durham and the Southern AIDS Coalition and believes a world beyond borders and binaries is possible. I 100% agree. And without further ado, Joaquin.
All right, thank you so much, Corey, for the introduction. Like Corey said, my name is Joaquin Carcano. Very excited to be here with y'all today. Thank you for taking time out of your Friday evenings to be here with us to really listen and learn to some really incredible community members we have with us for a conversation that we need to have more often. So I'm really excited to get this started. So I'm gonna kick it over to our panelists today who are gonna, if you can introduce yourself, share a little bit about your background, anything else you wanna share with us, and then we'll jump into some conversation and questions. Ames, would you like to go first and tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. I'm excited to be here. So thanks for our host and thanks Joaquin for moderating us. My name is Ames Simmons and my pronouns are he and him. I am policy director at National Center for Transgender Equality, where I've been for almost 4 months. And prior to that, I was policy director at Equality North Carolina for 4 years. And always glad to hear about my former boss, Kendra Johnson, and the good things, the good trouble that she's getting into in North Carolina. Um, I'm a queer white transgender man. I'm in Raleigh right now, which is land that was taken from Catawba people and other indigenous groups that our government doesn't recognize. I am an attorney by training. I grew up in Atlanta and practiced healthcare law in Atlanta before I got the chance to come to North Carolina. And I'm glad to be here, but we'll be leaving soon. I'm 50 years old and have a lot invested in aging in the transgender community, and glad to be here.
Thank you, Ames. Really excited to have you here with us and share all your wisdom. Jane, would you like to share a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Hey, I'm Jane Hutchison, and so I want to tell you first off, um, uh, I know it looks like I'm winking at you. I'm really not. I've got an eye issue. Okay, so just don't think that I'm winking at you. Okay. Um, so I am a transgender woman, um, and so I grew up pretty much in this area. If you're hang around the Sage Women, you'll see me there mostly. And I think the reason I'm a panelist is because I was born before the rocks cooled. Okay. People ask me, when did you know you were transgender? And for me, I was very young. I remember my mother, she would tuck me in for bed, and she'd have me say my prayers, and she'd turn out the light, and she'd close the door. And then what I would do is I would pray, God, please let me be a girl when I wake up. And so this was, I was probably 4 years old or so, and it's a very vivid memory for me because I prayed it every night for years and years, because we're talking like 1959-ish. Wasn't really. I mean, if God didn't intervene, you weren't going to transition, kind of, you know. And I grew up and got to like junior high age or so, and then really came to understand that from society's perspective, um, transsexualism, which is what they called it at the time, was really considered a sexual deviation, and I didn't want that. Didn't want to be that. My best friends in junior high school were all girls, three of them, and then they scattered to different high schools for high school. And then in high school, my best friends were girls, right? And this just happened organically. There's something in me which connected with other girls, okay? And it made sense. Um, when I got to college, the environment was different. We're talking like 1975. And I remember watching Renee Richards on television. She was a tennis player who wanted to play, transgender tennis player, wanted to play on the women's circuit. And that was controversial, as things have changed, right? So, and just remember thinking, God, that's what I want to do. And I'm not talking about playing tennis, you know. I wanted to transition, but I realized, just from a financial standpoint, that's never going to happen. I'm never going to have that kind of money. And then, so I just, kind of lived my life the best I could in adulthood. Lots of stuff was going on, Stonewall was going on, just lots of other progress and just different things were going on. I was oblivious to all of that. As far as I knew, living in Raleigh, I was the only transgender person, you know, other than maybe Christine Jorgensen and, you know, I mean, so, but I tell you what, things changed for me after I turned 50, things changed for me because I was driving home from Pennsylvania. It was a long drive, had time to think. And I was thinking about that little boy that used to pray to be a girl. And I had an epiphany. And there were two things. One thing was that when I was that age, I didn't know there was a biological difference between male and female. I mean, I knew women had breasts, I could see that. But as far as any other plumbing, I didn't know. So for me, it was more about the clothes I get to wear and the toys I get to play with, you know. And so, and the other thing that I realized was that um, it was close to a decade later before I ever had a sexual thought. So it could not have possibly have been a sexual deviation. It wasn't. It had nothing to do with sex. I just had a mismatched gender. That was the truth, and that truth really set me free. I was able to at least think about transition. And so in my late 50s, when my marriage had ended and my employer's kind of parent company decided they were going to go a different direction, they were pushing me into retirement. And I said, look, this experiment of living in the wrong body has gone far enough, you know. So so the day that I retired is the day that I began transition. And so that's been about 6 years now. And so I'm old, I'm transgender, so um I guess that's why I'm here. Okay.
Thank you both. I mean, Jane, you're gonna make me tear up a little bit over here. But what freedom that is, you know, you got retirement and the freedom of your truth, and that's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah.
I thank you both for sharing. You know, it's not easy to be that vulnerable, but who better to learn from than the people who live this reality, right? You know, and really opening up space for y'all to share. And y'all touched upon a few things around, you know, the medicalization of our bodies, how that's been a barrier. Now I think there's, you know, more of a movement that is giving us access, the financial barriers, the media impact of being able to see other trans folks and let us know what is possible for us as well. So thank you both for that. Before we get started on some of our, you know, I have some questions I'd like to ask you all. I think it's important to sort of ground ourselves in terminology, so we have a mutual understanding of community and language. So I'm going to turn it over to Ames, and Ames is going to walk us through some important terms for the rest of our conversation.
Thank you, Joaquin. I'm gonna hope, as I always do, that this works out. All right, cool. Y'all are seeing a slide, is that right?
Not yet.
All right, it never works out. All right, hold on. How about now?
Not yet.
Still no slides.
No.
All right, well, we tested this, y'all. So I do not know the vagaries of PowerPoint, but we do not actually have to have slides. I will just walk through a couple of terms just so we're all on the same page. One is the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. Sexual orientation is a person's attraction to another person. So it's relational, it's about how you relate to other people. Whereas your gender identity is your internal sense of what your gender is, whether that is male or female or somewhere else on the gender spectrum or outside the gender spectrum in the gender universe, as I like to think of it. So it's an internal thing. It's not a sexual orientation. Gender expression is all of the characteristics and mannerisms that we have that help communicate our gender to other people. When we use the term transgender, it's an umbrella term that can be used to describe anyone whose gender identity differs from the sex that they were assigned at birth. Cisgender people, on the other hand, are people whose gender identity aligns with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So in North Carolina, we estimate that 0.6% of the population is transgender. That's no doubt a dramatically underreported number for a variety of reasons. So 99-ish% of people are cisgender. I also want to bring up the term non-binary, which is also an umbrella term for people who reject the gender binary, the way that our world insists on dividing things between feminine and masculine, between female and male, woman and man, girl and boy, and gender non-conforming people, who are people whose gender expression doesn't conform to the gender binary. So some some non-binary and gender non-conforming people identify as trans, and some of them don't. So it kind of depends on the person who's in front of you. But I will say the emergence of, well, we know that non-binary and gender non-conforming people have been around as long as transgender people, which is to say as long as people. But the world became aware of non-binary and gender non-conforming identities later. Then we started hearing about Christine Jorgensen that Jane referenced, who's a trans lady in the 1950s. So people tend to think of non-binary and gender non-conforming people as being young by and large. And there are a lot more percentage-wise of the population of people who are under 18 who do identify that way than there are older trans people. And that is my intro.
Thank you, Ames. Yeah, it's important, language is always evolving, and I think that goes not just for trans folks, and it's important that language is affirming and gives us, it's a way to honor people, so thank you for sharing with that. But yeah, I'm gonna jump into some questions for you all, some conversation. Folks, feel free to put any questions in the chat and we'll make sure to address those as well. But to kick us off, y'all kind of talked about visibility, how important it is to see people, that's in sports or, media, and that really, again, allows us to see the possibilities and remind us that we're not alone, like Jane, you mentioned, you believe that you are the only person. Many people have often felt that way. And so there is this increased visibility. June is Pride Month, in the US. We're seeing increased visibility, more conversations like this for the trans community. But part of that is this misconception that it's sort of these ideas that it's trendy, it's new, it's only for young folks, which is false. As y'all know, you're like, I've experienced this, I know this, that it's not new. And it really overlooks the adult trans and older generation of the community. So I'd like to ask you all if y'all can provide a little more insight into your experiences navigating, community, coming out, whether that's like family, work, and coming into yourself as an older trans individual. And what are some of the unique challenges you have faced in terms of aging?
Okay, well, coming out for me was different than it is for a lot of transgender people. I didn't have to worry about my parents, for instance. They had both passed. And it was like when I got to the place when I transitioned, there were just a few people that I had to, be concerned about losing them. This is a huge deal for us, though. Most transgender people, this is agony, realizing you can lose, you can lose your parents, you can lose siblings, it's like I've got a friend who lost her children. Her children will not speak to her. And I mean, it's like when you think about transitioning, these are the costs you have to think about. These are real costs. And like I said, for me, it was a little bit different. I didn't have as much to lose, which I guess is a good thing.
And like Jane said, it sounds like our at least the outward part of our transitions happened around the same time, like 2015-ish. But that was like the end of years and years of therapy and trying to come to terms with transness, and several tries of coming out to my parents. So I was also, you know, an older person when I transitioned. So when I first became aware of it, I was 38 and started my transition at 45. And it's just, for one thing, um, I think there's physiological differences, particularly like there definitely are once your body goes through puberty. But it's like it's super awkward to be going through a second puberty when you're in your mid 40s. So there's that. And I'm sort of still in the midst of that. If you think that, you know, puberty does last for a number of years for most people.
Yeah.
The other thing about it was that my parents, well, that when I finally came out, my mom had passed, but that was the third try of coming out to my family. So they had 40 years of calling me by my birth name, which was a real binary feminine name, and referring to me with she and her pronouns. And my dad's going to turn 82 this year, so it's not that unusual for him to slip with my pronouns or even with my name. And that is not, you know, we haven't disowned each other. Just it makes family gatherings, they're probably a little more tense than they used to be. But I'm able to participate more as my authentic self. So to me, it's worth it, you know, to deal with that tension than to just be like sitting in the dysphoria of trying to pretend, you know, during the holidays that I'm somebody that I'm not.
Yeah, you know, it's transgender people. As far as I know, every transgender person has depression. I don't, you know, maybe not, but it's so ubiquitous. We even have we've got our own special flavor, right? They call it gender dysphoria because it goes along with it. It's crushing. And, and so and there's so many things that play into that. You know, when you're talking about your relationships with your family and your friends, when you're talking about just trying to come out into society for the first time and being the fear of ridicule, you know, there's just so many things, just the bureaucracy that you have to go through and everything to transition. It's hard. It's hard. And so, you know, at least fortunately in my case, when I was able to transition, a lot of that lifelong depression just dropped away. So that's good. But, you know, it's like one of the advantages I have being older is, and this, I'm not kidding when I tell you this. It's just that an older woman kind of looks like an older man. Okay. So, so, you know, as far as, you know, people pretty much accept me as, they don't know I'm transgender. They accept me as a female, and that makes my life a lot easier in that regard. So,
Yes, thank you all. You know, like you all said, we often talk about young folks in this process, but like you all said, being older and coming out old, when you're older and as the years go by, that you carry this for a longer portion of your life, which can feel very heavy. And, though maybe you don't lose your parents in some cases, you have a more established community, right? Because you're older, because you're an adult, because you have have a community and roots, and that can be much more difficult to navigate in some instances. So that family dynamic is really important,
yeah, one of my goals, you know, when I transitioned, um, I had a therapist, and I recommend everybody to have a gender therapist, whether when they're talking about transition. We went over some goals. I had some goals. One of my biggest goals was I want some friends,
Mhm.
and especially when you're older, you've got to have friends. Okay, if you're transgender, um, yeah, you know, it's like that's gonna help you live to have some friends. So you got to have some friends that understand you, and that accept you, and that what happens is that community becomes your family. Okay, so like the Sage women, they have embraced me, and I love them. And you know what? They're family, and that, you know, so, you know, I was able to realize my goal, but that is so crucial when you're older. You've got to make those connections somehow. I mean, I've got connections online to people all across across the world, really. I've got, people in Portland and people in Indianapolis and stuff like that. All that matters. So if you can't get support locally, get it online, get it through something like Second Life or Discord or something that is just crucial, you know.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. Friends, chosen family is, a concept that like LGBTQ individuals know very, very well. And
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah,
like you have found your family, your people, right? That
yeah.
affirm you, validate you, and that's huge. Um, to make sure that you're not alone. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, y'all mentioned touching upon some of the physiological differences, and we think about trans healthcare as, hormones and surgery, which is crucial for many folks, not always the path that everyone wants to take, but can be very crucial. But part of these conversations and part of these spaces is to also expand people's idea of what trans healthcare is, and all the components. And so like Jane, you mentioned like therapy, making sure you have people to process this with, right? So what are some of the key sort of health and healthcare priorities for yourself and for the trans community in regards to aging? What would you say are necessary? Anything else you want to add to therapy, or yeah, what's on your mind as the years continue to pass and you're thinking about trans healthcare?
Well, one thing that I don't know the answer to is the long-term effects of hormones on your body. And like, so I've been taking testosterone for 6 years. Like, am I going to take it forever? And if so, like, could that potentially damage, my kidneys or liver that have to filter it? Will I go through menopause? That I desperately would like to know the answer to this question. And all there is out there is like lore among trans men and non-binary folks who are assigned female at birth. So we definitely need some more like longitudinal studies to build the evidence base. One of the things that I worry about physiologically is brain health. Like I worry about as I get older, and cognitive decline, dementia may, for many people, as we age, we begin to go into cognitive decline. So like, will I be respected when I no longer, when I feel like I'm starting to lose power or agency over like the direction of my life? Am I going to lose control of my transition? And that's something that I've been thinking about for a long time.
Right. So for me, there's some considerations for me. So like for a lot of folks, they can, if they want to transition, there's places they can go to get, like, if you're a trans woman, there's places you can go to get, hormones, um, uh, different avenues that you've got. For me, I didn't have as many avenues because I needed to see an endocrinologist because I had other things going on, right? And so they're concerned about things like blood clots and uh, deep vein thrombosis, blood clots in your legs, a bunch of different things like that. And honestly, it's like they don't know the answers to, like, what are the risks? They don't know. I mean, they really don't know. There have been some studies, limited studies, but they are not complete. They don't know. And that's what you're dealing with. And so here I'm taking hormones and um, I don't know. I don't know what like Ames said, I really don't know what the long-term effects are. Um, uh, and so my choices are limited. I've got to see an endocrinologist. Well, look, when you go looking for endocrinologists, there's bunches of them in the area, but there's 2 of them in Raleigh that will deal with transgender folks. Okay. And now I think one has retired, so there may be some more, I don't know. But it's like I was able to find one, but it's like that's an issue. It's an issue finding medical doctors who will treat you. I've been to doctors, I've been to a surgeon who just didn't, you know, they didn't want to have anything to do with me because I was transgender. What I did, let me tell you what I did is when I went looking for a GP, my insurance, gosh, switched back and forth every year, it seemed like. So when I came to transition, I knew I had to find a doctor that would be friendly. And that's what I did is I looked for a doctor's practice that was a contributor to Pride. Okay, and so that's how I found my doctor. These are the things that you have to do. These are considerations because you know what? All doctors are not going to treat you. They're not. They're not going to accept you. And you know, they can just say, well, it's you know, it's my religion or whatever, and just deny you service. And it's you know, those are realities.
Yes, I mean, like y'all are bringing up such important points. Ames, you mentioned brain health. You mentioned, what are these long-term impacts? That we are kind of going into this trusting doctors. Who are also kind of learning as they go. Though we've always existed, some of our healthcare, especially specifically when it comes to hormones, has not always existed, or the time and money has not been invested to really track what it's doing to our bodies, even if they've been prescribed for decades, right? People have not cared enough to really think about, okay, what are the side effects? What are the long-term implications of this? Brain health, like you said, cognition, things like that. And Jane, thinking about, endocrinologists and other chronic health issues, that we need to think about the interactions and not just medication, but, if we have a need in terms of our healthcare, like you said, I need to make sure things like, are they going to take my insurance? Are they nearby? All of these different things. And then are they trans affirming? So you filter down. And what are we left with? Sometimes nothing, right? Sometimes you have to go in and just hope they don't ask anything, or sometimes, but you also have to be honest with the healthcare provider to make sure they're really treating you right and really taking your whole body into consideration.
Well, I feel fortunate because I know many people. Like I said, I talk with people all over the country, and there are many people who are in a situation where, in order to get any care at all, they've got to travel 100 miles, you know, and we don't have to do that for the most part. We're lucky, but we don't have a huge network of people we can see, but
Yeah, that distance, the lengths people will go to or like have to go to in order to
yeah,
access that care that
yeah.
people don't always realize. Yeah, and thank you for sharing, what it took to find your provider, right? I think that's huge. Thinking about that, there Corey did put in the chat that there is the Campaign for Southern Equality has a Southern Guide to Trans Health Providers, which is huge and has been a huge community effort. But often we have to vet our own people, because we don't know who's going to treat us well, who is going to be accepting, because it matters from the receptionist all the way through to the provider. And that was such a smart approach. I haven't heard about that before. I haven't really thought about like who is donating or who's volunteering maybe at these events. Like that is, I really value that. And I'm really interested in exploring that. So yeah, sorry, I was just in my mind a little bit. But yeah, so we're talking about sort of vetting resources and institutions, and I think we'll touch on that later. But something that's on my mind in terms of community, especially for older trans folks, is community spaces. A lot of community spaces are really for young folks. We have like youth centers, or there's sort of like bars, nightclubs, and that often can be inaccessible physically, time-wise. If they're late at night, they're not expansive enough to all members of the community. So I'm wondering what kind of community spaces have been created that have been helpful for you all as older trans folks. What do they offer, and what would you like to see? I know, Jane, you mentioned SAGE has been huge. So what other community spaces, or if you want to share more about SAGE as well, what community spaces are important for older trans folks that people really need to take into consideration?
Well, so when I transitioned, one of the things, like I said, one of my main goals was to make some friends. And so one of the first things I did was go to the center, which is on Harrison Street, I think, at the time. downtown. The meetings, transgender initiative meetings were at night. And it's like, I did not feel safe going there at night. Um, and when I got there, I found there weren't any older people there. They were all younger people. And honestly, it's like it seemed to me, they made me feel like, hey, boomer, it's like, so, so it's like, and even as far as that goes, I don't know of like a transgender support group in this area for older folks. I don't know of one, okay? It's less important for me simply because of the Sage women who are awesome. There are a few transgender folks there, um, but it's not an exclusively transgender group. But it's like, that's the main thing is that they accept me and I'm part of their group. And that's really all that I need at this point. There was a time when I needed advice about how do you do this and how do you do that. And I was getting that online for the most part. Um, Now I don't really need any advice on that stuff. I just need friendship, companionship, and that's what I get from Sage. It's wonderful, really is.
I love that for you, Jane. So glad you were able to find that space. And like you said, it's not a trans inclusive, like exclusive space, but they affirm you, which is huge. I'm really glad you have that in your life. Ames, would you like to share?
I mean, AARP has been a great supporter of the LGBTQ community and just putting on this webinar tonight. I joined AARP as soon as I turned 50, not just for the discounts. So there's lots of support there. There are also some efforts in the Triangle area here with the Orange County's Department on Aging has partnered with Sage. I think it still is. They have a LGBTQ senior resource team that I used to sit on when I was at Equality NC. And they put on an event called Sage Table, which is where this is a whole program that Sage has that is it's designed to be intergenerational, where there, are people, younger folks, as well as older folks who are breaking bread together. There's a little bit of program that they moderate, but it's a really good way to have an intergenerational conversation. And one of the projects that they facilitated was called the WISE Project. That actually one of Equality North Carolina's Rural Youth Empowerment Fellows, that was their project. And it was designed to, it was a public health strategy to try to bring older folks and younger folks together to help. It is very important to maintain social connections. And we know that that's harder as people age generally. It's even more difficult for LGBTQ people, but it's also really important for us to be in touch with younger folks because we're less likely to have family members that we can rely on. I know my chosen family, they aren't in North Carolina, one in New Orleans and one in Houston, and they're both the same age as me or older. So, I cannot necessarily rely on them being around to help take care of me. So Sage also puts on an intergenerational institute at the Creating Change conference every year, and I recommend that too.
Yeah, thank you all for that. It's important to know, what spaces have been important, crucial to feel supported, to be a part of community, so we can build on that and use that also for models for future work. You all have mentioned sort of, chosen family around Ames, you brought up, specifically intergenerational, approaches to some of this work. And that's something I want to talk a little bit more about, because I think, that's something that I think is definitely lacking. And it's exciting to see that work really being invested in. But I think we have a lot of potential here to really grow some community networks in terms of mentorship, both back and forth mutual mentorship and sharing of resources, relationship building, community. So I'm curious, what would some of that relationship building look like? And also, what advice do you have for younger trans folks? I think it's really important for people to turn to, some of the adults in our community and listen to their experiences and insights. So what are some of the lessons you would like to share and pass along? Any advice?
Well, I would like to say that um, it's almost overwhelming. It really is. From step one all the way through your transition, it's almost overwhelming. But you could do this. If I'm gonna talk to young people, it can be done. You can do this. Um, and it's kind of like, um, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Okay, that's what you do. You pick what you can do. Some things you can't do now. I don't have the money to afford surgery, right? I can't do this. There are things that you can do. Make yourself a list of things and see, this is what I can do. And what you want to do is you want to have small steps forward all the time. You can get there. And the way things are right now are not the way they're going to be. Okay? I've got a friend who I became friends with, um, oh gosh, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. I don't know how long ago, long time ago. She was just transitioning. She was living with her parents. She didn't know how she was ever going to get a job. And she was so distraught about that. I talked to her just last week. She's become a manager in the print department of a newspaper. And I mean, so, these are things that happen. So, it's so hard. We are swimming upstream all the time. It's so hard for us. You're gonna just keep at it. You're gonna do this, okay? You can do it. Um, and the one thing I think, if there's any way you can do this, there's insurance stuff and everything that gets in the way. If you can get to see a gender counselor early on, that's going to help you. It's going to help you figure out who you are. It's going to help you figure out your pathway forward. So those are good things.
Definitely. Thank you for that.
I I guess what I would say about this is that I do think that people who are older often are wiser. We've just accumulated more experience and had more, personal growth opportunities. But I also just want to honor that there's so much that older people can learn from younger people, that young folks are the experts of their own existence, and there's no matter how young they are, right? Like they have things that are important to the way that we live in our world. um, I think that sometimes older transgender people can be a little more invested in the gender binary, just because that was the only, that was the only way you could transition up until very, very recently. Even when I first started going to endocrinologists, they didn't understand things like slow dose hormones. The idea, like if you said something like, you know, I want to transition without hormones, like that was a sign of mental illness. Or if you wanted to be on hormones, but wanted to, you know, have a check-in with your doctor to stop hormones. If it turns out they weren't for you, they were like, oh, you're confused. You don't, so that's a medical liability and we're not going to help you. So there's reasons, I think, why trans people were just like, it was beat into us that you at least have to say these things, if not also believe them. But that's not everybody. And I do know that there are older trans folks who identify as non-binary and gender non-conforming. There is no such thing as one person being transer than somebody else. Like there's no checklist that you have to qualify to be trans. Like you as you are and know yourself to be, if you know yourself to be trans, that's good enough for me. And the other thing that I would say, to just back up Jane's point, is to not give up, especially right now. Some of the legislation that's been moving through the state legislatures, it's been around, pretty much since Laverne Cox was on the cover of Time and folks became aware of transgender people. They started trying to legislate us out of existence. HB2 being, a prime example of that. It's just really poisonous to hear your humanity debated by these cisgender heterosexual, like people who have nothing in common with your life and have no desire to know what your life is like. There are people everywhere across our country, in communities, who are fighting back against that legislation. Some of it did get passed in some places in this session, more than the year before, for example, but there's a lot of it that didn't get passed. And if you end up, like, if it just becomes overwhelming, which is understandable, know that there are resources that are out there, like the Trevor Project, for example. They have text line, they have Trevor Chat. There's definitely folks to talk to if it feels like it's overwhelming. Like, I think any trans person has been there where it just felt overwhelming, but don't give up.
Yeah. Many of the trans people I talk to, whether they're old or young, many of them just say, I don't know what I am. Okay, I don't know what I am, and it's frustrating. It's scary and it's frustrating. And it's like, you know what, you'll figure it out. Just, don't give up. Keep going. You'll figure out what you are. You don't have to be one thing or the other. It's like AIM says, one of the things that you really should do is learn to trust yourself. Everybody's trying to tell you you can't trust yourself. Yes, you can. You can trust yourself.
Thank you all. I want to put some of that on these like affirmation cards and send them out to folks. I think this messaging is so important, really to think about. It is overwhelming. It can feel so scary. Because I remember myself when I was really realizing this is the next step I need to take, is like, I'm excited and now I'm terrified, because you don't know that it's unfamiliar territory, right? And you have to put a lot of trust into other people too, including yourself. And then it's important to allow space for people to explore who they are. I think one of the many gifts trans people offer everyone is that we get to have some creativity to our own selves, that we are all sort of damaged by stereotypes. Even if someone is very sure that they are a cisgender person, that they are straight, they're still boxed in by stereotypes of masculinity or femininity, and that they can only do XYZ. And it's just like, being able to really explore who we are benefits everybody, and we need to allow everybody space for that. And trans folks, I think, are a blueprint for that, to really think about, like, let's continue exploring. It's beautiful, and we all need to allow that space for others, and for people as trans allies, support that process, right? So thank you all for really offering those words of affirmation for younger folks, and really as like an exchange with younger folks as well. I think we're almost to the close of our conversation. There was a question that came in the chat, Jane, that was directed to you. I'll read it straight from the chat. Let me find it. It was from Alice, and Alice said, Jane, how did you get your voice to be feminine? This is a major issue for my MPF wife. So if you
All right. All right. Full disclosure. Okay. I'm listed as a resource on the center's website for voice. Okay. So I'm just saying. Okay. And so what I did is I started out on the internet, and I looked at what the internet had to say as far as advice was concerned. Some of it was good, some of it was not good. Some of it was was not good at all. And I had to weed through that, and I did that really myself one of the things I did more than anything else was I listened to women speak. I listened to their characteristics. Okay, listen to the characteristics of what they say and how they say it. And it was surprising to me some of the things I learned doing that. So in the process of that, I learned how to it's kind of funny because what I did honestly is there are things well, let me just give you an example. There's a friend of mine named Crystal. Crystal's just this girly girl and I just love her to death. And she's like, she says, "Oh, that's fantastic. I love that. That's great. I'm so happy for you, you know." And it's like I love listening to her say that. So I stole it. Okay. So it's like imitation, imitate. Listen to TED Talks, listen to the women speak and just say, or the guys. I mean, if that's where you're wanting your voice to go, listen to them speak, listen to a little bit, try and say things exactly the way they say it. And then what happens is over time that creeps into your voice, you know. So that's what I did. And
Yes, thank you. Thank you for reminding us that you are a resource. That's
I
important.
I am a resource, yeah.
So maybe Alice, you want to connect further with Jane. I'm sure Jane would be happy to connect with y'all. And yeah, we think about language when we're growing up that we often imitate our parents. That's part of growth is you imitate the people who are around you. And there's different types of role models or things we want to emulate, that feel both affirming to us. And I think also it can be a source of safety, as well. Um, if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop in the chat before I close our conversation. But for the last few minutes, otherwise, do y'all have any closing words? Is there anything you want to make sure that people walk away from this conversation with, for themselves as an ally or for the trans folks in their lives? Yeah.
I'm putting a link in the chat to SAGE's long-term care quality index. This is a project between SAGE and the HRC Foundation, where they're really looking, developing criteria for evaluating long-term care facilities like nursing homes, like assisted living, so that LGBTQ people can try to judge in advance, like how affirming a residential long-term care facility might be. And I'm on the National Advisory Committee and help to make sure that the criteria include gender affirming services and supports. So that project is underway and you can get more information at that link.
Thank you, Ames. Jane, any closing words? Anything you'd like to share with our folks watching?
Well, so I guess the thing I want to say is that, as far as my life is concerned, I'm happier than I've ever been in my life. I really am. Being in the right body is huge. And the fact that honestly people just think I'm a cis woman, that to me is like, I can go throughout my life just at ease, being myself. And it's like, my whole life was such an introvert, you know, and I'm finding that, you know what, I'm not anymore. I don't have to be. And it's just really wonderful. So just hang in there. Hang in. Anybody who's out there struggling, hang in there. You can make it. Just got to stick with it. Things are not always, things don't always stay the same. They'll get better. So
Yes, thank you. I mean, that makes me so happy, and I think I've heard similar stories from trans folks saying like, I thought this was who I was, in terms of being an introvert or being shy, and I was just like, no, you were just not ready to share your full self with everyone, and now that you're like, I know exactly who I am, I want to share it with as many people as possible, which is a really beautiful thing. And I think the mental health aspect, I think, is so huge because there's also this idea that we're depressed because we're trans, which is not the case. We're depressed because we're scared of how people are going to treat us because we're trans, and so being able to come out and feel supported and affirmed by community is like, we know who we are and we're loved, and our depression is subsides, and I think that's the important thing, is that it's about how are we going to be treated. So thank you for both reinforcing mental health importance, especially long term, throughout this process for ourselves and for everybody. Everyone can benefit from talking to someone who's not going to be biased, right? I think we're about the close of our conversation. Thank you all so much for sharing so much of yourselves. It's hard to be vulnerable again with like strangers who you can't even see through virtually, and just really grateful for the labor, the love, all y'all continue to invest into this community. Thank you all so much for watching. It really means a lot for y'all to take some time to listen, to learn, and carry it through to the people in your life too. So make sure to think about this, to carry these lessons forward. And thank you so much to AARP, to Sage for the work you're all doing, and the LGBT Center of Raleigh, because these conversations are so crucial and we really need to create more spaces for this. So thank you all. And Jane, Ames, if you have anything else to say, feel free, and just really grateful for you all and for the people watching.
Thank you, Joaquin. Thank you, Ames and Pax and Corey. It's been good. So
The only other one last tidbit that I would add is to just bear in mind that the experiences that people have depend on the intersections that they live at. So you heard experiences that Jane and I have, but these are not the same as, for example, folks who have to walk through this world as people with disabilities, people who are Black, Indigenous, people of color, folks who are immigrants, and trans people are in every community, but many people face more marginalization than the folks than me. I'll just speak for myself. So definitely try to be in community with as many trans people as you can.
Definitely. Yeah. Diversity of voices is always important. We have so many different perspectives, and that's part of what makes our community beautiful, is that we have so many perspectives, so much insight to offer, and we're everywhere. So even when you think someone's not, we're listening, we're around. So remember that. But again, thank you all. This was a really, really sweet way to close out the week for me. I'm very grateful for you all. All right, and I think that's the close of our conversation. Enjoy y'all's weekend.
Thanks so much, all.
night.